This episode is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Go to cardkingdom.com/studies to pick up your choice of far-out cards from the edge, including spacecrafts, galaxy foils, and the moonshot variants, like on Ragost, everyone's favorite lobster gastronaut. Thanks, Card Kingdom, for the support. I'm a member of Team BASILISK, an esports organization on a mission to inspire curiosity in science through the medium of gaming. Edge of Eternities is full of crunchy terminology and theories about outer space, and is thus the perfect case study to align with our goals. Perhaps magic can be the gateway for you to learn something new about quantum entanglement. Thanks, Basilisk, for the support. In order to describe what cannot be seen or felt or understood, you must first let yourself slip into the realm of metaphor and imagination. Perhaps we can begin with the familiar. This is the multiverse. It is bountiful and sundry. It is brimming with life in all its many forms. Everything that is, was, and will be originates in its antithesis. This is the blind eternities. It is the background scatter. It is the totality, the endless potential. In living parallel to the events and places and people of the planes, there is another reality, a separate reality, a twin expression of the blind eternities. That is where we are going now, a space called the Edge.
Right, Star 1 to Flight Com. Scopes are clear. The stars are yours.
The material makeup of the Edge is an abstraction, yet with some effort, it can be approximated. Presently, it remains codified as 5 colors of pure energy. White is the void. The space between 2 stars is not fixed. Rather, it is eternally expanding, an endlessly creative endeavor. This emptiness is perfect. It is structured and divine. It gives way to causality and lends room to novelty. We need space to grow. Blue recognizes this. Blue is attracted to white's energy because it allows for transmission, the stepping stone of knowledge. Information requires a call and a response, a game of cosmic telephone. Blue is matter's mirror, and it is vain. It loves the self-assurance of understanding. For this, blue deeply admires black. Black is matter's anchor. Without it, there is no system to organize. Gravity is the unifier. In it lies a promise of the inevitable, the eventuality of all things. Black is doubtless. All objects collapse into black's fatal attraction, producing heat and energy, and thus red. Red is the time between. Red is the eternal echo in the chasm of the Edge. A photon ricocheting through a corridor, the flash of light in the dark. Red is transitory, and it is always smiling. Grinning back is green, the propellant of evolution. All of Red's actions become reactions, spiraling into the breeding grounds of chaos and complexity. Green is the flapping wings of a butterfly, the shuffled deck, the blunt shield to Occam's razor. Naive are those who trust simplicity. Green reminds us that we will never, ever untangle the deep mysteries of life, or even the shallow ones. Instead, we must allow life to take its course, just as it has in the Edge. Across eons, the 5 colors of mana have intersected countless times. Their accidental encounters and spontaneous collisions have produced dazzling nebula of cosmic gas and dust. Swirling and condensing, the dust has given birth to stars. The stars, in turn, have become mothers to planets and moons. The warmth of their light lends nourishment to the budding worlds fixed in their orbit. Sothera was one such star, but she is now dying, and her demise is the source of terrific contention. Sothera wanted to die the same way all stars do, in supernova. In the final centuries before her imminent eruption, she drew the attention of distant admirers. She became a monument, and monuments attract pilgrims. The first to arrive, to the surprise of no one, were Pinnacle, the governing body of the Edge. They command and regulate faster-than-light travel. Without Pinnacle, nobody moves. Through the use of their eternity columns, they defy and define time. Pinnacle learned this secret from the Drix, the protectors of an ancient past. In exchange, Pinnacle offered the Drix a promise. Should any star die, they would aid in searching the surrounding system. For what? Very few know. Next came the Ilvoy, a strange species, to probe the depths of Sothera's distant gas giant. On Uthros, a terrible pressure crushes the air and those beneath it. Diamonds fall like rain. Within these endless storms thrive the Medusa people, who sculpt their cities from dense clouds. Down in the depths of this deep blue hell, they conduct a very quiet research. Something drives them. The Eumidians were already here, just as they are already everywhere. They had been dormant for so long in the jungles encased in ice on Avendo. From buried pods of microbial slurry, they emerged and began their work of terraforming. The Eumidians are an adaptive kind. They change the land, and the land changes them. A harmonic symbiosis. As all flocked to witness the funeral of a dying star, the native Kav wanted only to escape. They were suffering a crisis of their own manufacture. Manigold, a vital but rare resource, was abundant on their home planet of Caveron. But incessant mining and mounting greed resulted in cataclysm, which split their world in two. Now, Caveron before swims in the debris of Caveron that is, as the Kav seek succor to flee their homeland. Human beings are divided between two factions that move about the Sothera system, not as survivors or observers, but as missionaries. In the disaster site, they see opportunity to further their bifurcating beliefs. The Sunstar Free Company are a dogmatic mercenary corps composed of cosmogrands and knights and cadets. They believe in helioism, a constant expansion of everything into a crystalline void. To empty oneself into the perfect structure of nothingness is to become one with their god. That is what a star does when it dies a just death. The monoists, however, see themselves actors in a prophecy of Armageddon. Their singular objective is to collapse stars into supervoids across the edge. They believe that salvation resides in the 0 point, the hyper-condensed center of a star turned inward. Within it resides their prophet, holding open the door to the next eternity. And so, war has found this space. Sothera, once alive, has been killed neatly, and with tremendous intent. The monoists have turned the sun black, and the helioists have readied the weapon of retaliation. Magic has never told a story completely based in science fiction. Over 3 decades, the game has experimented here and there with some conventions of the genre. The Phyrexians tap into questions of the cybernetic body, the monolithic mechs in the Brothers' War, and the flying thopters of Abishkar imagine futuristic technologies of combat and locomotion. Neon Dynasty was maybe the most explicit departure from the game's high fantasy roots, and the many sets that followed have loosened the grip on the sword and board aesthetics of the early years. But we've never gone to space in a canonic full-scale setting that wasn't rooted in comedy. I spoke with Roy Graham, the story lead for Magic, about the risks and the thrills involved in writing for Edge of Eternities. He was in the middle of a move when I called him, which felt like a perfect visual representation of this strange, liminal place we found ourselves entering.
In classic sci-fi, all characters kind of operate as planeswalkers in a funny way, where they are capable of moving between vastly different worlds through a inhospitable, dangerous in-between zone. In some ways, the sorts of fantasy storytelling we do in normal magic, or like magic in the multiverse as we know it, is kind of kin to a lot of sci-fi storytelling already in that way. Fantasy is almost always pointed backwards at some imagined version of the past, some mythical reinterpretation of our oldest stories. And science fiction is this gigantic, wide open possibility space of like what could be one day.
In narrowing down the stylistic infrastructure of the Edge, the world-building team was determined to stay true to two guidelines. The first, this is Magic's take on a science fiction setting. It will read and play familiar to anyone who has seen the game before. The second, this place is considered soft sci-fi, opposed to hard sci-fi, which is concerned with the laws of real-world physics, chemistry, thermodynamics, and so on. Soft sci-fi is much more conceptual. The rule of cool applies here, and it applies often. In soft sci-fi, you don't have to calculate the gravitational pull of a planet that has split in two and become its own moon, but you do have to justify its symbolic value. This is a visual representation of avarice and self-destruction, and it serves to tell the story of the Cov's downfall. That's not to say that all scientific claims were off limits. Early in our call, Roy brought up the theory of convergent evolution, which posits that certain life forms tend to look alike, even when existing in independent time periods.
In many places in the Edge, there are echoes of the magic multiverse that we know. There are only so many shapes that make sense for a certain environment, for a certain set of laws of physics. The reason for that is at a certain scale, in a certain environment, things will take familiar shapes. The Cov are not Kavu, but magic's everything. It functions under a certain set of rules, and things recur because of that.
The Eumidians may resemble somewhat the Nantuko of Dominaria past, but they are not the same. To that extent, the Eumidians of Sothera don't look like the Eumidians of a different solar system because they evolved under vastly different conditions. Think of the many, many forms of beetles we have here on Earth. This is just one sample size of a highly varied species. The Ilvoi look like jellyfish, but they are much weirder. Their gelatinous amorphism allows them to endure the crushing weight of their home planet's atmosphere. Because of this, they don't have faces, and so they rely on emoji masks to communicate with the humanoid species they encounter beyond Uthros. The Esteli, another new life form, are analogous to what we know as angels.
We're in science fiction, so that means they are photonic beings. They exist as light, as the purest possible version of the way that white mana exists at the Edge. As such, they are very sacred beings and typically aligned with the Sunstar Free Company and the general Summist faith.
Just as well, the Edge has produced a variety of species that we've never seen before. Among the most mysterious and uncanny are the Var.
Oh, the Var, the Var are a myth. No one knows whether or not the Var are real. That's a children's story, Sam.
Fair enough, Mr. Graham, you can keep your secrets. How about the Drix?
Ancient, old survivors of a conflict none can really remember in the Edge except for them. Almost no one meets a Drix in Sothera. They are incredibly rare. They introduced, through Pinnacle, the existing economic system of the Edge, which is a potlatch-based economy. It's like gift-giving to raise your personal status and trading off of favors. The Drix they're the purest sci-fi species to me in this, because they exist on a timescale that doesn't even really work in a fantasy setting. Because of that, they're really mysterious and they keep to themselves. The Drix are maybe my favorite out of all of the species. They can only exist in Magic's take on a sci-fi setting. They are that cosmic timescale, that like unfathomable age made manifest, made flesh.
Importantly, the Drix are among the only species that can natively weft walk. By collapsing all of space and time into the distance of a footstep, they can travel faster than light anywhere and everywhere in the Edge. This ability makes them highly solitary people and rare sights to see. They're also among the few who remember the threats of the Great Devourers. To slow their return, the Drix have accepted the responsibility of hunting Eldrazi. The most familiar face in the Edge is, in fact, not a facsimile. Tezzeret, through phenomena beyond his understanding, has appeared in this unique space, thereby defying what many thought impossible. There is, seemingly, the chance of connecting the Edge to the multiverse somehow, somewhere.
Tezzeret is really great in this story. There's a lot of modulating where, like, the monoists bend gravitational forces to fight with. The Sunstar Free Company use like charges of like pure light weapons and beams and blades and stuff. There's a lot of things that obey the like sci-fi rule of so advanced it's basically magic in the setting. And then there's Tezzeret, who is a wizard doing spells. So that's great.
Tezzeret has picked up a sidekick of sorts, a disgraced Ilvoy scientist called Menon. Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it. Among the coolest features of sci-fi storytelling is leveraging all the linguistic tropes embedded in the genre. Sci-fi rewards the creative writers a lot of vocal flexibility and flair. Given that Edge of Eternities is, at its core, a space opera, they can also embrace the esoteric and the grandiose in their world building. As a lifelong fan of Coed and Cambria, I'm admittedly very partial to many of these card names. The Dominion Bracelet, Pain for All, Ouroboros, Planetary Annihilation, Zoo-Ifit, Osteoharmonist, the Eternity Elevator. Magic has always delivered highly redolent card titles. Ultimately, this is still a text-based game, as is the web fiction, so writers must rely on language for emotional resonance. I asked Roy about another name that caught my ear, the Solar Javelin, which is the colossal weapon that the Sunstar Free Company are preparing for this conflict.
What I found really enjoyable about working in the words of The Edge is the way that sci-fi recontextualizes fantasy words and words that feel like they belong in other parts of magic. Solar Javelin is a great example that you just said, right? Solar Javelin means something really different in a fantasy setting. It means probably like a magical javelin that you like hurl at a night demon or something. And in Edge of Eternities, it's an evocative metaphor used by this faction to give purpose, weight, emphasis to this vast photon charging cannon that is like built in orbit and sailed through the weft, through the space between worlds to reignite a dying star.
Synthesizing with the lexicon of the Edge are a base of rich concepts that guide character and environmental designs. Magic has always been excellent on this front too. Consider the shape language and color palettes of the opposing factions. Soldiers of the Sunstar Free Company wear sleek and shiny white armor with gold accents. Their weapons are made of pure light. Their spacecrafts are sharp and elongated, then widen out towards the rear, mimicking the rays of the sun. In contrast, the Monoists are draped in layers of dense black cloth and ribbed bodysuits. Beneath their necks, their chest plates fold into a circular pattern, like the two-dimensional profile of a star collapsing into a black hole. Their shuttles are curved and warped, and all lines gesture toward a single point. Pinnacle, the overarching and multi-species governing body, is costumed with long, rigid lines that connote order and discipline. Fittingly, the Infinite Guideline Station, the main hub of interspatial travel, is spherical, with sectors jutting out into the four cardinal directions like a compass. It's no coincidence this is a 5-color card. At the planetary level, Each biosphere reflects the tonal center of the 5 factions that inhabit them. Adagia, for example, is defined by intense earth-sculpting winds, and is encased by a superstructure similar to the armor of the Sunstar soldiers. From ground level, they can see the sun, while the citizens of Susser Secundi bathe in the photon collars of the nearby supervoid. And beyond that, where Sothera's gravitational pull starts to diminish, we enter an enigmatic space akin to the deepest layers of the ocean. This is where enormous, dreamlike species take shape, from amicable whales to translucent leviathans, and a very familiar elemental emerging from constellations. All of these decisions are intentional, and they have outward rippling effects that create cohesion and believability at the macro level. Every detail matters. I can show you this image and tell you that our subject is a dreaming acolyte, and just by glancing at the bowing figures repeating across the background, and the posing of the young aspirant on his knees with his weapon suspended above him, and by gleaning a bit from the flavor text, "I am worthy of the Faller's blessing, I can prove it," we can intuit everything else. Even without context, the characterization is complete. We know this story revolves around Alpha Rael in some way. The card demands his significance. And the exact same is true for Halia. The setting and composition and visual storytelling is identical, as is the format of the flavor text. This mirroring carries over into their second pair of cards, which depicts the 2 characters striking heroic poses in front of commanding backgrounds, suggesting their ascendance and acceptance of the duties bestowed upon them in the first scenes. Through this clever doubling, the dramatic implications are magnified. Alpha Rael and Halia are each a member of the rival forces combating over control of the dying Sothera. Each are representatives of their greater ideologies, neither of which is right or wrong. This is not a story about white versus black, or about good versus evil, or about the morals of creation and destruction. More than anything, this is a story about faith. And faith is selfless. There's this painting by Dominic Mayer that I've been looking at for a few weeks. It's on a card called Gravkill, a perfectly pulpy name that speaks succinctly to magic's aesthetics and mechanics. The card's flavor text is a lyrical excerpt from the Theorem Unending and Final, Antiphon 6, the holy scripture of monoist belief. The text itself is a song sung by the immortal Faller, the messiah of monoism, who lures his believers into voluntarily plummeting toward the center of supervoids. This painting is beautiful, haunting, and melancholic. It shows the torso of a Sunstar soldier torn cleanly through by a tiny supermassive ball of gravity. His body is slowly pouring into the void like bathwater into a drain. The heart is all that remains from the hollowed-out hole. It might be the only bit left of him once the rest is whirled away. And how fitting a symbol, the heart, the locus of our beliefs, the infamously irrational, the most decisive of our faculties, but far from the wisest. Edge of Eternities is a sci-fi space opera filled to the brim with the usual trappings. Beneath the veneer, though, it offers a profound meditation on existence. It is bold in its willingness to venture into themes of religious convictions and the behaviors they instill. It is brave in addressing the befores and afters of life, and daring to provide hypothetical answers through the medium of fiction. It wears a lot of these anxieties on its sleeve. This is not a typical magic set. It is heavy and contemplative, and it asks some rather big questions. But that's what the cosmos does, doesn't it? Science fiction stories can't help but amplify human angst. In everything we make, there is a deep truth about what we fear most. Space and time, in its enormous scale, props up a mirror and asks, "Hey, what are you doing here?" When you zoom out far and wide enough, as the Voyager did once upon a time, it's easy to disappear in a sea of blackness. And to counter all that, to really fight against the dread of the unfathomable, that inky darkness of eternity, you offer hope. That's what science fiction storytelling is. It is hope. It is the heart hovering. In the space between the edge and the blind eternities, there is a permeable zone called the Chaos Wall. On the other side, the edge pushes up against the Quiet Wall, an indeterminable space, where reality decays into oblivion. Thank you, Wizards of the Coast, for sponsoring this episode and for providing all the necessary materials and assistance to help guide my research and ideas.